So today we're just going to talk about after the war, and where did we leave off?
We left off.
You had just gotten back to your hometown.
Oh yes.
Okay.
After working and you were in school, you told us about school and how the
Oh
No, those are for you.
Okay.
No.
I'm not saying we have to go back.
Oh
Just
Okay.
drank
There's
some
a
soda. I did not even
beautiful
think about it.
Yeah.
Could you bring
Yeah, I'll
a
bring
small cup
water.
of water?
I'll bring water.
They have coffee, I don't know if they will drink water, but
Oh,
they
who
brought their
wants
own.
water?
I'm okay.
I'll take a little water. That's
Do you need help?
Yeah.
We're still recording, so whenever you're
Oh,
ready.
okay.
So we'll start where I think I left off. It's, it was the time that I started going to school, and I went into the third grade in Hungarian. The next year, since it is now Romania, where we live in Georgian, my parents decided that I should study in Romanian, and they put me in a Romanian classroom. I did not know one word Romanian, and I don't think that I knew where I was until Christmas. But by the Christmas vacation, which is almost 3 months,
Hold it for me.
I will continue in
Oh.
a second.
Well, is it the camera
That's all right,
on?
that's all right, that's all right. They can manage that. to cut out.
Thank you.
So by the time the Christmas vacation came around, 3 months in the year, I was able to communicate and babble in Romanian. There was one performance that all of us were asked to sing, and they just told me to lisp, don't move my mouth, but don't say any sounds, because it didn't sound anything like Romanian. Anyway, as I started learning Romanian and spoke Romanian, I started forgetting the German. At that time, I was not very sorry for losing the German, but in retrospect, every single time when you lose a language, it's not too good. You want to keep to the knowledge of any language that you have acquired in your life. Then came that very unpleasant story of the nationalization and being declared as kulaks and what have you. And then I told you that I advanced to the gymnasium, to the first class of high school. At that time, high school started at the 5th grade to 12.
Oh, really?
It was one unit, there was no separation. And I progressed, I studied in the 5th, 6th, and 1 or 2 months in the 7th before we managed to leave Transylvania.
And I'm sorry, can you just orient me? What year is this when you were starting to leave Romania?
It was 1950.
Okay, and that makes you how old?
It makes
13?
me 13,
Okay.
13 and a half.
Alright, thank you.
I told you, to go back a little bit, I told you that in 1950 I turned 13, in the winter of 1950. And I told you that before the war we had a large synagogue which was had a community of almost over 1,000 Jewish people, and now there is a small community of 90-some people. Religion is not encouraged by the communist regime. We have, instead of a rabbi and a cantor and a shochet, we have only one person who is the religious leader of the community, and it's a shochet. It's a shochet, who does the butchery from time to time for the Jewish and the Jewish tradition of kosher butchery. So my stepfather, another person, and this shochet, we stood on the steps of the synagogue, and I said the prayers, and laid the first time the tefillin in public, and I was declared as bar mitzvah. Each of us had a little glass of the tsuika, of the Romanian common drink, and I walked to school 8 o'clock in the morning, and everybody went on their way. So I did not even have a what we call a minyan, the 10 people, 10 males that are required for an official Jewish ceremony. So that was my bar mitzvah. At that time we were hearing of the possibility to go to Israel, but we really didn't know if that will come around. I think 2 months before the end of the school year, I left school because my parents applied to leave and to obtain that one-way trip certificate to allow us to leave Romania, and they would not allow me to go to school because if I want to leave Romania, Romania does not have to waste its money on educating me.
What was all this like for you?
To tell you the truth, I'm still 13. I have authority, the teachers, the instructors in the school, and I do whatever they are telling me to do. My parents explained to me, never mind, we'll go to Israel, you'll study in Israel. Well, so the summer went somehow, and on September the 9th or something, or 7th, I don't really recall exactly, we left Gheorgheni in Transylvania. We traveled to Bucharest, from where we could take a train to Constanța, and we boarded a boat, and were allowed to take with us 70 kilograms per person, no jewelry, had to leave everything valuable behind, and although you could sell it, but people were threatened not to buy anything from the Jews, so in particular from the kulaks.
So did they search your luggage when you got onto the...
Yes, they searched the luggage. They were looking for anything valuable. They would, anything that the person that was searching didn't like, he just threw it to the side. I don't remember as a child. I just remember that everything was searched and turned upside down. What were the things that were there? There was some clothing, obviously. We knew that we were going to a very hot climate, so we didn't take any winter clothes. We took mostly lighter, brighter clothing, and household dishes. Pots, pans, flatware, these kind of things. A few plates, very few people took china because they did not rely on them handling the boxes in a fashion that would not break everything up. So, and we went onto the boat. We had the privilege of being in the sub-department, sub-class. So there was the first class, second class, third class, and sub-class. In one of the holding halls in the belly of the boat, there were beds hang up in 4 or 5 tiers, I don't know. And we tried to climb, I couldn't climb up. But anyway, it was so hot in there, it was very near to the engine room. So we spent the entire 3 days and nights trip from Constanța in the Black Sea, through the Dardanelles, through Turkey, and to the Mediterranean, and to Israel. I spent all the time on the deck. So on the decks too, there were the decks for the first and second, third class were not allowed, but it was a part of the deck and the front and the bow of the ship, and that's where I stood with a couple of other friends, and that's where we slept all the time, because the space allocated to us in the boat was not habitable. I don't remember my parents slept next to me, and this is how it was. So on the third day, we were very happy to have arrived into the port of Haifa, and the issue of disembarkation started and people are given numbers, and we were given a very late number, and all of a sudden my stepfather became very agitated that we have a late number, because it happened that people that the Romanians have declared inappropriate persons to leave Romania were not allowed to disembark in Haifa. So we were afraid all the time. So I don't remember. At that time, my uncle who lived in Israel, he was the young fellow that left before I was born, left for Israel. He went studied in the Israeli Institute of, at that time it was called Technion, it was a Jewish Institute of Technology, and then it became the Israeli Institute of Technology. And he enrolled in the British Army, then into the Israeli Army after 48. And he was already a high-ranking officer by that time. And somehow he helped arrange, he came literally near the boat, and we could talk from him from the top of the gangways and what have you. He somehow arranged that we were the number 30 or 40 to get on the boat. Very traumatic, you know, you go down and you pass through, and all of a sudden you're in Israel and you're free. Well, I didn't pay attention that I was dusted with DDT, because everybody was suspect of bringing fleas, and there was a tremendous effort. So we were sprayed with DDT and loaded into a truck and were taken to a temporary camp where we were given tents, and before it was decided where we would live in Israel. And the Israelis have had a very healthy approach to the immigration, because at those times the boat of Transylvania brought 2 shiploads of immigrants every week, continuously for several months. And there were near 1,000 immigrants with each trip. But anyway, it was near the Jewish holidays, and we were taken out of the camp, and we spent the holiday with my uncle. And I had another relative from my father's side, a very, very distant relative. And I spent some time with them. And later on, from there, we were allocated to a camp for immigrants, Machane Olim. It's a camp for immigrants. It's a tent city, and we were given a tent. It was very hot. In Israel at that time of the year, there are the eastern hot, dry, desert, sandy winds. They are called Hamsin. Anyway, it's very unpleasant, and coming from mountains in Transylvania, it was a weather shock for us mostly. My stepfather had an uncle who lived in Netanya, and thus we were sent to a little camp area near Netanya, some 3 kilometers from Netanya. And 2 or 3 weeks after we stayed in this camp, we moved into my stepfather's, my uncle's apartment, and that's where we stayed. But pretty soon we realized that we are penniless. My father couldn't find a job. It was a very difficult time in Israel. It was 1950. Only a year and a half after the Independence War, there was literally famine in Israel, and they realized that they were not able to take care of me as a child and educate me, because to go into school you had to pay tuition. Later on in Israel, the parliament passed a decree in which they provided free education up to high school to everybody. But that time you had to pay. So again, I was out of luck, no school. So anyway, at those times, the kibbutz movement, with the assistance of the Jewish agency, was taking in and organizing youth groups, 50, 60 in a group, and they were placing them in one of the kibbutzim. And my parents have thought that that's the best way will be for me. But that literally pushed me out of the family environment, which was not very very happy environment because of the dire economic situation, into a commune. I was surrounded with 60 other kids of my age, more or less, between 12 and 14, and I ended up being in Givat Brenner. Givat Brenner, G-V-A-T, Brenner, B-R-E-N-N-E-R, Brenner. It is one of the largest kibbutzim in Israel. It has 1,200 members. And the idea is to take this young group of immigrant children from Romania, to educate them, to teach them, and create a nucleus for a new settlement or an addition to an existing settlement that needed to be reinforced. We were in a situation that you get up in the morning, you go and work until noon, and in noontime you're given an hour or so to get ready, then you go to classes and you learn 3 or 4 hours. You get up early in the morning, and by the time you have lunch and you get to the class, you're so tired, and most of us fell asleep, and it was hot. The weather in Israel is very warm, and I remember the classes being a torture for me. They were teaching us to speak Hebrew, to sing in Hebrew, some education of the movement of the kibbutz, which is mostly social studies of the environment, of the history, and some education in biology, mostly as pertains to agriculture. To learn to be good kibbutz dwellers and kibbutz members, knowing the earth that you work, and the cows that you milk, and the chicken that you have to feed, and all that stuff. I liked plants, and evidently I've shown that I have manual skills, so I ended up working in a tree nursery, and subsequently an orchard, and throughout the time I always worked with plants, and working with plants, then I worked in gardening a lot. So I learned a lot about horticulture, about gardening, about flowers. But when finally we arrived here, the desire to work with plants went away very quickly. It was hard work, but there was nothing better at that time. Well, very quickly, the 2 years that this nucleus was supposed to have been organized has passed, and it was by now 1952, and most everybody has decided that they are not staying in the kibbutz, and that nucleus broke up. Most everybody went back to live with parents and go to school, and I have lost contact with them. Luckily, I was offered by the kibbutz a situation that they called an adopted child of the kibbutz. So I became an adopted child, and I was living among the kibbutz children. All the children that their parents were members of the kibbutz. And there was a school, the kibbutz had a school that taught classes from first elementary to the 12th high school grade. So I was placed, according to my age, into the 10th grade. Well, but you see, I was lacking the education that goes between 6, a little bit of 7 to 10. That's 2.5 years of education. And I tried to make it up by really making a big effort to learn. All these years I thought and I was dreaming of becoming a physician, but as you heard my story, there was no foundation, there was not a chance. In Romania, while we were in Romania, that was not a possibility because a son of a kulak would not be allowed to go to university to study medicine. So I somehow started giving up the dream. When I got into the kibbutz, I needed high school education. I was so far from high school education as you can imagine yourself to be. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. But as the years, the 2 years that I was among the kibbutz children, and I was in a school, in a regular school, I was able to study, and I put all my effort in reading everything that I could put my hands on, literally everything. And I started studying. Very soon I realized I have to study several topics that were not particularly taught in the kibbutz. The kibbutz taught, again, the kibbutz movement, social studies pertaining to the history and the importance of the socialistic movement to maintain the kibbutz ideology. They taught a lot of agriculture. The teachers were professors in the nearby Weizmann Institute. And they were literally very knowledgeable in educating us. But I realized that understanding and getting 4 or 5 courses in the structure of the earth and the dirt and how roots obtain their nutrition from the dirt will not help me pass the matriculation exams to enter the university. So somehow, with the help of my mother at that time, she was working very hard. My stepfather became very ill, he had a heart attack and was not able to work. Somehow she gave me some money and I bought a course in correspondence, and I started studying high school in correspondence. So whatever I was not taught in the kibbutz school, like mathematics, physics, chemistry, to the high school level, I picked up and studied. In addition, in Israel you have to study the Hebrew grammar and the Hebrew literature, the Bible studies. These were the studies that I took up in correspondence. As anybody in Israel will tell you, for a newcomer, that the language is not a native language, to study and understand the Bible in Hebrew, it's an uphill battle. Not to say anything about literature, and in particular the grammar. I had a very hard time to study grammar, and there were no preset educational methods. I literally had to memorize everything. Slowly, I entered the end of the second year, now already 4 years in Givat Brenner, 2 in the youth group and 2 in the school, and I was about to enter the third year, but I told them, that I want to go and study for matriculation exams, like here the high school exam or SAT, everything that you need to know for the SAT in order to be accepted to a university. At that time only the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, because that was the only medical school in Israel. So when I went and told them that I want to study this, they made fun of me and they said, nobody in kibbutz said that you have to study. So I tried to explain to them that, I want to study nobody has to tell me. I want to know, and that's what I want to do in my life. Well, they brought me for trial in front of the class, and the entire class, my classmates were seated there, and I was seated here, and the teacher was sitting there, and everybody was accusing me of being disloyal, of having taken advantage of them.
How many classmates?
30, 40. And the attack was very harsh because I didn't have a parent to keep my back, and I didn't have anybody to support me. So finally I told them, yeah, we are a family in the kibbutz, and everybody has, to confirm to the family, and I understand that they invested in me a lot of money for giving me that wonderful education. And although I worked a little bit to return the favors, but that's what I want to do. And even in a family, sometimes there are arguments and ways have to part. I want to leave. I cannot stay here because you're not letting me study. And my illustrious teacher over there says to me in a quotation that rings in my ears even today, there is no difference between amassing knowledge and money. Money in the kibbutz, funds, capitalistic gold and silver money is a despicable thing, because in a kibbutz what matters is equality. Everybody works, everybody gets everything, whatever they need. So in this type of social structure, when you say you want to go and work, earn money to go to, there is no difference between learning and amassing money. So studying became all of a sudden a very despicable capitalistic idea. I couldn't perceive that. Anyway, after this argument back and forth, 2 or 3 days, I was asked to give them back the latest new shoes that I got from them. They gave me an old shoe. I packed my belongings in a sheet and put it on my bag, stepped on the bus, and traveled home. Home to my stepfather and my mother. Well, they were not very happy because they had 2 rooms. One was kitchen and one was where they slept. And so I slept in what was the kitchen, and I looked for work and I went to work. And I worked, this time not 4 hours, 6 hours. I worked in gardening. I made up plans for gardening. I planted gardens for others. I made a living. I had to live. And after coming home from work, and in the hot summer, 8 hours outside, it's tough. And you have to pick yourself up after a shower and sit down and pick up the books. But I did this somehow, and came the time of the exams. It's called the external exams. You do intern exams if you study through a school, and the external exams if you study outside of a school. I tried to get in the 12th grade, but there was only one high school that I was aware of, and the manager of the principal of the school explained to me in so many words that if he accepts him in the 12th grade, I won't be up to par to whatever the others can do, and I would lower the standards of the school, and he cannot accept me. So my parents didn't know any better. Their Hebrew was not very good. They didn't have the connections, didn't have the way to understand that they have to do something to prevent that from. Anyway, I passed the matriculation exams, but I got very poor grades in Hebrew grammar and in Bible studies. It's impossible. The grades are from 10 to failing. The 5 is a passing grade but it's below standard. So I had 5 in Bible studies and 5 in Hebrew grammar. In mathematics, in science studies, and what have you in English, I got reasonably high grades. I got 9 and 8, so it was a passing grade. At that time, I was already nearing the age of 18 that you have to enroll in the military service. So I enrolled in the military service. And I served in the compulsory 3 years that you have to serve in Israel. And during my service, I made another effort. And whenever I had free time, I studied. I studied these 2 topics that you have the privilege to repeat the exams to get a better grade. And I was lucky I got a better grade and I passed the exams. But this is not the end of it, because to get in Israel into the medical school, you had to pass a competition exam. There were some 600, 700 candidates, and there were less than 50 places, and there is no other medical school. So I tried the first time, and my grade was below the minimum, and I was not even invited for an interview. At that time, I decided that I'm going. In France, you can enter into a university, and after you study, the decision whether they accept you to the medical school is after the first year. And I thought I'll be able to prove them that I'm capable. And I was accepted to the Sorbonne in France, in Paris. We had a distant relative that lived there, but they were in no situation to keep me there, to help me, so I would have to work there. So that was one way out. I bought a boat ticket to Marseille, from Haifa to Marseille. I didn't know how much it would cost me to get to Paris, but and at the same time I continued to study to prepare myself for the competition exams. And I moved from my parents, I moved to Jerusalem. I worked, I dug ditches, I did a lot of hard physical labor, and then I found finally a job in a bank, and I was what's today a teller at a bank. And I had 1 year of that. It allowed me to study. I passed the competition exams. I went to an interview. I was in my interview, and lo and behold, I was accepted to the medical school.
Wow.
So
What year was that?
that was in 1959.
So you were 22? So you finished the army?
Finished the army, completed the military service, and worked a year in, almost a year in Jerusalem, and lived in Jerusalem on my own. At that time I met my wife.
Can you talk about that?
There is not much to talk about.
Of course.
We lived in Netanya. My mother, my stepfather, and Yafa lived in Netanya, and I was in Jerusalem. And I used to come home almost every weekend, every other weekend, and we were in a group of kids, and that's where I met her. And after we met, we continued to be very good friends, and we got to go out, what you call going out steadily. And she just finished the military service, and she wanted to study, and there was an issue of whether going to the university in Tel Aviv, which had biological, she wanted to study biology, it had biological studies, or in Jerusalem. As I was accepted to Jerusalem, she decided to go to Jerusalem too. So she came to Jerusalem, and since then we hang out together for the last 54 some years.
Just hanging out.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Wait, so you were accepted to the Sorbonne but never went?
never mind.
Okay.
I didn't have to go because
Right.
it was the issue of end of the summer of '59, and if I get accepted to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, to the medical school, and that was the only medical school in Israel, I told you that, and now there are 4 medical schools in Israel. Or pick up the ticket that I already had, because you had to buy tickets on these boats and go to France. And then the beautiful friendship that we had with my wife and I would have uncertain future. Anyway.
You weren't married yet, though.
No,
Okay,
no,
okay,
no.
so we'll get to
So we went to, we started the university, we started the same classes. Biology and medicine have similar classes for the first, almost the entire first 2 years. So we went to the same classes, we studied together, and we tried to help each other, but I rented a small room of size of a stamp. That was room for a bed and a little desk of 1.5 feet long and 1 foot deep, and my closets and bookshelves were 2 window indentations, and there was 1 door, and that's it. And that's what I could afford to pay for, and I studied and went to the courses, and in the evenings I would work, mostly do what later on other colleagues did, to be a nurse, helping out somebody, and I spent 3 nights in somebody's home, and I slept next to a terminally ill patient, and I helped with whatever needs he had. And I did bookkeeping, but anyway, I worked throughout the years of my medical school all the time, until I literally could not, because I had to prepare for the final exams. After the second year, end of the second year, we got married. I was the keeper of a building. In Israel at that time, the problem of TB was very significant, and there was a very strong anti-tuberculosis league. And it received donations from many, many people. They had a wonderful building and a big yard, and they had a tiny 1-room apartment for the watchman who watched the building at night. So for doing the bookkeeping for this anti-tuberculosis league, I was given the privilege to use the watchman's apartment that nobody was using at that time, and I had to do the watching of the building. And that's where we lived until the end of the 6th year. So yeah, I graduated and finished a master's degree after the 5th year, and then more or less a steady salary used to come in, and we could live on, we had something to live on, but I still worked. I worked as a, all the years, 3 nights on the average at the hospital, at the University Hospital in Hadassah in Jerusalem, and mostly in the emergency room. And that gave me I would work for 8 hours a night, that's the night shift, and I could sleep sometimes 2 hours, sometimes only 5 minutes of it. But the classes would continue the next day. Now, looking back into what was nice and what was beautiful in my life, really meeting my wife was one of the great changes, because my life became more organized, settled. I had a direction, having been accepted to medical school, having participating in a group that has a goal and a level of education that I was aspiring to. So the years of study in the medical school were my most beautiful memories, and I enjoyed very much the studies of a physician. And I always thought that I have to do a lot, I have to be prepared, and I read mostly. I had a very poor handwriting, and I had very poor skills of doing what she does, taking records and writing something in a fashion that can be read afterwards. So I spent my time during lectures listening very intensely. I couldn't hear anything except what the teacher was telling us. And then I would go to the libraries, take out books, then work, then read. I always had 3 or 4 books to carry, heavier books, because I was always reading and learning. The books inherently have much more than the teachers are able to pass on to you in frontal lectures, and they go with things in depth, and I feel that gave me a better education, having supplemented all the frontal education with whatever was written in the books and journals and what have you. I compliment myself because that gave me a very wide understanding in medicine and ability to practice my profession with a significant inherent security. Well, I was at the end of the my 5th year, and Yafa was pregnant with our first son, and I finished the final exam in obstetrics and gynecology. Some exams you had to take at the end of 6th year, some exams you could take at the end of the 5th year. So gynecology and obstetrics was one of them. And the day after, my son was born.
Wow.
So I just finished the exam, and I came back, and before the final exam we had to do baby deliveries. And I came into the delivery room, and the nurse told me, "Hey, you passed the exam. You're one of the brightest students. What are you doing here? You don't have to be here anymore." I said, "No, my wife is in the other delivery room." So
How old were you when your son was born?
how old was I don't remember.
What
50.
date is this?
It
64?
was 60. It was 75. 75. So that's take out 30, remove 37. So that's 32.
32, when your first son was born.
Yeah. So
And what's your son's name?
Michael,
Michael.
the one on the left hand top.
Oh, okay.
Michael.
Picture that one.
So we were very happy, and but my 6th year was coming up, and the 6th year is the time when you spend most of your life in the hospital. And Yafa saw very little of me and Michael, and she spent many a night by herself, because I had the responsibility of being serving as a student, senior student, and I spent nights working in the hospital. And so by the middle of the 2nd year, I stopped working at night.
You had a lot of experience by then.
I could not afford to work anymore, because I had to study, I had to prepare for the exams, and I prepared for the final exams, and I passed the final exams.
So this exam was for what?
Becoming a physician.
Okay.
So you pass an examination at the end of the 6th year, and in Israel you had to do a year of rotating internship. So I started my year of rotating internship in Hadassah in Jerusalem. And then when I finished that, we moved to Tel Aviv, and I went to a program of surgery it's called Ichilov Hospital, which is part of the Tel Aviv University. And again, the way you specialize in Israel is it's a 6.5 years of specialization. You have to do so many years to spend in profession and another 6 months in research. So not only you have to, when you finish your 6-year exam, then before you start your internship, you had to write a doctorate thesis. At the end of the training, at the end of the residency program, of the specialization program, you had to spend 6 months in research to come up with a work that had some scientific value. And so I studied, started initially general surgery, and then that time orthopedics started becoming a very attractive profession because of the advancement of technology and metallurgy and what have you. So I decided to switch to orthopedics. So I did a year of general surgery, 3.5 years of orthopedics. I had to go to do chest surgery, urology, all these things don't matter. Then I did 6 months of research. I operated day and night on a little newborn rat femora to measure something, and had to publish a paper which was published in Acta Orthopedica Scandinavia. So,
Wow.
you know, it had to be a scholarly otherwise. So I received, I was the first one to receive master's degree in at the Tel Aviv University, continuing medical education.
Wow.
So, in orthopedics. So in addition to my MD, I have a master's degree too.
So what year are we at now?
Now I finished, oh boy, 67, 66 I finished the residency. In 67 I finished my internship in Jerusalem. 67 I started the residency, and I finished it in 73.
Okay.
After the 67, during the 67 war, I served in the military as a physician already, and I did a lot of operating day and night. And the end of the 67 war, Jerusalem was liberated and Mount Scopus was liberated. And I don't know how much you remember, there is a huge amphitheater on Mount Scopus that all the time was in the hands of the Israelis, but that was an island inside Palestinian and under the United Nations auspices. So we did not have access. They would allow for a group of workers to maintain the place, and it was a whole tragedy to get through to them. And sometimes they attacked the convoy, and that was under the auspices of the United Nations. Anyway, Jerusalem was liberated in '67 war, and the first time that the Hebrew University graduation ceremony was held in this Mount Scopus amphitheater was when I received my diploma.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing because all the government was present, and it was a large, and they are giving out all kind of diplomas for fellows in art and master's degrees, but doctorates are physicians, a group of 50 doctors to get a doctorate is a big hoop to do, and I was honored. I felt privileged. I still have that memory. It was a unique. you stand there, and in the late afternoon it becomes a little bit cool, and the wind blows, and you see the desert, and on a clear day you can see from there down, and you see the Dead Sea.
Wow.
And you watch the Judea desert. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. Anyway, so then we after receiving my doctor's diploma, as said in '67, we moved to Tel Aviv area. Yafa moved back to Netanya. We lived in Netanya, and she worked in Netanya, while I worked in Tel Aviv and at the Ichilov Hospital and did my specializing in orthopedic surgery. When I finished my residency, I was a couple of years, I worked for in 2 hospitals, and I slowly became what you call the deputy chief of a service in orthopedic surgery. That was in Petah Tikva, and I really wanted to, by that time we had 3 children. My 2 daughters were born, and so we're a family of 5. And I got to the point that I felt that in order to advance my medical studies, my orthopedic knowledge, I have to go abroad and learn. So I applied to fellowships, and I was accepted to the Harvard program, to the Massachusetts General Hospital in hip replacement. I was really interested in joint replacement, and there was a guy there who was one of the major players in the world at that time, and I was his fellow for 6 months. So we left Israel, and we boarded a plane in a roughly 90-degree weather, and we landed in Boston in probably, what was it, 32, 34 degrees with wind and frost. The next day we arrived in Boston, it started to snow, and I keep telling everybody that it stopped snowing May 15 and started raining May 16. So anyway.
Wait, what year is this? Land in Boston.
This is December 76.
You have 3 children now? Okay.
And I started working in January 77. So I worked for 6 months in Boston, and meanwhile while I was there, I was looking for a possibility to find another place for another fellowship, because this fellowship was only for 6 months. And there was a gentleman in Baltimore by the name of David Hungerford, who offered me to come and work with him, a mixed clinical and research fellowship. So we moved over here to Baltimore. So in July 77 we moved to Baltimore. And we are here since. So the things happened that when I was here for 6 months, they started telling me that they are looking for another person for the next year, and do I want to continue and be here? So my contract was extended for a total of 2 years. So by that time I was faculty member at Hopkins, and
What were you doing at Hopkins? You were a teacher?
doing surgery, operating, and doing research.
Okay.
And I worked here on bone blood flow. And Hungerford didn't have a lab, and I established a lab, created the lab. His department was located at Good Samaritan Hospital, with which I stayed in connection until I literally retired. After 2 years, I've decided I want to go. I planned on returning back to Israel, but the situation in Israel was such that there was no open departments. Still, the economic situation was so tenuous. No new hospitals were built, no new departments were built. And when I inquired and picked up my connection with many people in Israel, inquiring whether the contract I was offered by somebody and the promises I was given going back are realistic, they told me not to dare even to fly and come back to visit him, because he does not have anything to offer. He did not have a department. The department was non-existent, did not have instruments to operate with. He did not have a space to admit patients to. So, and that was the time that my children started growing, adjusting, starting high school here, and I opened my private practice. So in '79, August '79, I opened a private practice, and I was in private practice since. I retired from active orthopedic surgery in 2002. And afterwards I worked at, that was because of some health reasons, and then I worked as a physician, as an orthopedic surgeon, consultant to the social security service. So this is kind of the story of my my life so far, in which the part which is relevant to your education or to the education that I want to impart is no doubt the story of the horrible story of the Holocaust. But the way I feel that I was able to, in spite of the enormous difficulties they encountered, I managed, because of my intense desire to achieve a higher education, to amass that despicable knowledge to bring me to be a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and take advantage of what our modern life can offer in terms of providing for my patients and providing for my family. I want to think that my family thrived, and my children in their turn got married, and each of them has 2 children. So now the family of one single child, Yafa, and one single child, myself, is together a clan of 14 people, plus 16 with the 2 dogs. One is represented in this photograph, and there's another dog that's not on this photograph. So anyway, this is the story, and if we reflect to the story of the Jews that went and suffered the Holocaust horrible times, and what was important and how that can be avoided, and what brought me satisfaction and pride in my achievements and my family's achievement is education. My son studied, and he is a PhD in computer sciences. My older daughter finished MBA from Duke, and my little daughter, she's a lawyer. She studied at NYU and became a lawyer. She's a lawyer in New York. So I continued, Yafa and I, we continued to provide opportunities for education for our children. And we think that the most important thing in life is education. You have to learn, you have to read, you have to widen your horizons. You have to see history, you have to be proficient in sciences, but you have to be proficient in social studies and in history, so that history does not ever repeat itself again. How can we achieve that? Well, each one in its own way, but one thing, you have to learn, understand, and be able to differentiate between what's right and wrong, and to be able to have the strong character to stand up for what you think is right. And you can reach that only by education, not by somebody telling you that the world is, that the earth is round, but by doing things that would teach you and understand you, to comprehend why people say that the world, the earth, a planet is round. sciences. There are all kind of ideologies that have survived from the Middle Ages and seem to have some resurgence now in the 21st century that are bogus, that are non-scientific. You should be able to have enough knowledge to study, to pursue scientific approach to our life. Scientific approach is look at the facts, try to understand them, try to repeat experiments that you can, and failure of an experiment is not a failure. Failure experiment is something that you have to study and learn from it. So we have to thrive to something that I think it's the motto of my way of thinking is never again Holocaust. And in way in which you should fight it is by education and pursue your education. And the more people are educated, the more people go to higher education, the better our world is going to be. So that's what I have to tell you. I could have spent another 3 days in talking and going in further details. I think that I would bore you, or if you have any questions, I'll be very happy.
I have a question. You said that a long time ago that they had found your father's ring and his pocket watch. Was that all taken, or do you still have that?
The pocket watch I have, we have it somewhere in the house. I don't remember at this minute where it is. I do have that.
Wow.
The ring, I know that my stepfather sold it and gave it away because they would not allow, the Romanians would not allow rings, not even wedding rings, for women to carry with them. So they melted all the gold and sold it to get some money. Because we had to pay for the ticket, the boat ticket to come to here. So what happened to the silver cigarette holder, I don't know. It was lost to me throughout the years.
You also talked about having a book that you picked up from.
Yeah.
Would you be able to show us that book, please?
Okay, I'll show you. So keep on asking me before you leave. I'll go upstairs and I'll bring it down.
Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. Or you want to pause and you want me to go up and bring it down?
Yeah,
Is
sure.
there, yeah,
Yeah,
either
you would
way.
do that?
Pause.
Yeah.